Kevin Bowen here. Don't forget to listen to The Fan now on 93.5 or 107.5 FM, and check out our latest coverage online at 1075thefan.com.
Christmas is approaching for the NFL. I know a lot of people treat the NFL draft like that. Well, I don't know, maybe open a present or two, or at least tease you with some presents on today's edition of Kevin's Corner. I am Kevin Bowen, Chris Presley across the way. Dane Brugler, NFL draft analyst. In my opinion, I think he's the best one right now from The Athletic. We are going to play an interview with him a little bit later on in the podcast, so really looking forward to that. And just in general, Chris, the Stephon Gilmore signing, just got back from the Colts complex, their first day of off-season program media availability, some Deebo Samuel smoke. I am really, really looking forward to this pod.
Yeah, and like I teased yesterday, and this was before the news came out today, and with Deebo, and he's plus, I think Colts have the second best odds if you want to go
Really?
Vegas, plus 600.
Who are the best?
I think it was the Colts, the Jets, the Falcons, and the Saints, I believe, are the four teams.
Guess the Jets based off the Tyreek Hill,
right?
Rumors from earlier in the offseason. So
yeah, but a lot to get into as we approach. I mean, we're 10 days away from the draft?
Well, yeah, I mean, less than that.
Less than that, yeah.
Yeah, a week from Thursday, a week from tomorrow. We're recording this Wednesday afternoon, a little bit later. I wanted to get, again, to the Colts for their offseason program. We'll go over a positional mock draft. I felt like this is the time to kind of reveal that. You guys know I do it every year, and I always enjoy that because I do think as much as, every GM, all 32, will come to the podium a week from Thursday or Friday and say, well, I mean, who's the best player on our board? And we just, felt like the Chiefs are not going to take Malik Willis. I mean, right. You know full well that the best player at a position of need is how you should operate and do operate with the draft. So I guess before we get to Stephon Gilmore, we haven't had a chance to talk about him, Chris, so I do want to mention him before we get to the mock draft and Dane Brugler. I did just get back from the Colts complex. It is a 9-week offseason program. This is week 1. Rookies will be there for the entire 9 weeks. Veterans will go for 8 weeks. They'll have a mandatory minicamp June 7th through 9th, and then they will depart. And I'm expecting the physicality to be pretty limited in the spring, which, is probably par for the course for a lot of NFL teams. I do think the Colts err on a little bit more of a less physical spring. Again, no one's putting on full pads. It's just not allowed, things like that. I did find it interesting. Frank Reich mentioned, about 10 to 20% of the offense will be different with the arrival of Matt Ryan. I think some of that is Ryan-induced. He wants to do some things differently, and his concepts and his language have that background. And you give your quarterback in a Frank Reich offense, full autonomy at the line of scrimmage. So you want to make sure he feels comfortable and can process things at a very quick manner. What I really was intrigued by is when I heard Frank share the 10 to 20%, I'm thinking, what about defense? We've talked so much about Matt Ryan, and rightfully so, this offseason. Chris, for the first time since 2018, the Colts are installing a new defense, and they've got multiple new offensive line starters. In a normal offseason, those would get a whole lot of attention. It just has been a little bit on the back burner here at Indy. And so I asked Reich, okay, what about defense? What would you throw the percentage there? And he said, probably about 30%. Man, I mean, that's a decent percentage. The 4-man front is still going to be there, and the 3-deep zone, of course, will be something a little bit different. But I am intrigued by that. You guys know I felt like this defense reached a ceiling under Matt Eberflus, and I think fresh voices, fresh perspective, ideas, certainly some talent will make things, a little bit more interesting. You obviously hope the ceiling is higher, which I could see why you would think that. On that side of the ball, we'll get to Stephon Gilmore here in a second. So those are really some of the big things. They did mention, I'm not sure if we got a Twitter question, but it sounds like T.Y. Hilton is still someone the Colts think about, and not to treat it like a boyfriend and an ex-girlfriend or something like that, or vice versa. But basically the door's not shut on that. And I think you could say that about a lot of veterans this time of year with how teams handle the draft and things like that. Going pay in the Dangbo last year probably slammed the door shut on Justin Houston, that sort of thing. So I do think T.Y. Hilton could possibly still be a Colt in 2022. But I think the draft could impact that. So, yeah.
Yeah, this is a great time of year. Pardon me. Like you said, as we approach draft day, and then again, just back to your point that you just made, the draft also is indicative of what other players decide to do. So It will be interesting. Obviously, Dane, Kevin teased he's going to be on here. He has a lot of really good insight. Kevin and Jake Query ask him a lot of good questions. 1075thefan.com, as you guys always know, who don't necessarily listen here locally, that's where you can go to pick up Kevin's stuff. A lot of people are talking about the fact that we made a splash not only with Ngakoue on the defensive line, but the big news this last week was Stephon Gilmore.
Is the cannonball splash bigger than can opener? Do I have that right?
I think it depends on your body size and how good you are at
maybe cannonball. You can get deeper into the water. Maybe that more of a sonic boom too. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Whereas can opener, you can maybe get a little bit of a wider body and
splash gets a little high. Like there's more verticality with the water.
More width with the can opener, more depth with the cannonball.
Yeah.
Again.
And then sometimes if you're like me and you get too scared to dive right at the end and just belly flop.
Sure. Yeah. And then you come out of the water and, boy, a lobster just right on your belly there.
Yeah.
I think Ngakoue was the bigger splash is basically what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm.
So cannonball, whatever you want to call it. I think he brings that presence. And, again, in a Gus Bradley defense that does not want to blitz a whole lot, I think you just need that sort of edge rusher. Also, you don't have the injury history nor the age of Gilmore.
Right.
You guys have heard me say this endlessly, whether it was Xavier Rhodes a couple of off seasons ago, whether it was Erica Ebron a couple of off seasons before that, Chris. I will always be a fan of kicking the tires on former first-round picks. Always. Now, this one is probably the priciest, certainly the priciest of those two, or those three if you want to combine all of them. But, the Colts got into a position at corner where I'm like, man, you got to 2019 and you entered that draft and took Rock Yassin 34th overall, and all of a sudden, Chris, he played the most defensive snaps of anybody on your football team in that rookie year. And I just felt like Presbyterian Temple background got exposed a little bit right away. And sure, Darius Leonard, he made the transition from a low level pretty seamlessly. But I think when you're out on a corner or when you're out on an island at times, you just get exposed a little bit more. You can't really hide out there. And that's where I look at this move and think, man, outside of that, it was Brandon Faison and Isaiah Rodgers as your nickel group around Kenny Moore. It's a lot of pressure to put on those guys there. The other thing I'm curious about is what does this mean just schematically?
Mm-hmm.
Is Gus Bradley going to be more willing to press a little bit? Do we see man coverage? There's the highlight going around where late in a game last year with Carolina, now unfortunately for Colts fans, it comes at the expense of a Matt Ryan pick. Stephon Gilmore's man-on-man with Kyle Pitts in the slot. That's not something you would see from a Colts corner.
Right.
Are those things the Colts want to explore with? I love ideas. You know me, man. Put more in your back pocket because you never know when you're going to need it on a game day. You never know when Hunter Renfro's kicking your ass or, what was it? Brandon Marshall had 37 catches against the Colts a decade ago.
Yeah.
When I think he was playing for the Dolphins maybe or Jets. I kind of forget.
No, I think he was a Bronco. He was a Bronco. I think he had like 20. It was something crazy. He set the record for most receptions in a game. I remember that.
Orange of the Dolphins had me thinking that, but yeah, you just want to be able, I think, to go to different pitches. So I am interested to see that aspect to it. And then if you look at the defense as a whole, man, you can check so many boxes of Ngakoue as an edge rusher, Buckner as an interior guy, Leonard speaks for himself. Kenny Moore, assuming those last couple games were the outliers last year, him as a slot. You hope Julian Blackman can get back to full health. Outside long corner was kind of the one you were like, about that. Now, again, I think your rush can cover up sometimes a weaker cornerback play. I think it's easier to do that than vice versa. But I'll throw in the but because you have to acknowledge health. You have to acknowledge age. A buddy of mine texted me, like, man, how many 32-year-old corners even play in the NFL? I mean, there can't be many,
Right.
let alone play at a high level. And when you look at the last couple years, Chris, he's missed 14 games, Gilmore. Why? Because of quad and groin injuries. And not to bring up like ugly names of the past, but I think you saw it with Greg Toller. You saw it with Vontae Davis. Hell, I even think you saw it with Xavier Rhodes a little bit last year.
Yeah.
Rhodes has been incredibly durable throughout his career. What happens? He gets that nagging hamstring in August, and I don't think he ever got over it. Missed some games, and I just don't think ever really got over it.
True.
So that is something. Yeah, but gosh, the other name that comes to mind is, remember Patrick Robinson?
Yeah.
Does that name ring a bell at all? He was kind of late Grigson signing, but again, it's just a position where you can get exposed with a little nick, and it's hard to hide those things. If you look at the Carolina numbers for Gilmore last year, the snap counts were not very high. I think he played like 8 games, and only 2 of those 8 games was he over 60%, 65%. So I'm not expecting him to come in here and start 17 games and play 100% of the snaps. So you're going to have to rely on other guys, Rodgers and Faison being those guys. But if health cooperates, this is a move. I won't get too deep into like his coverage numbers from last year because I've seen some very different, some stat sites had him as, really, really strong in coverage. I know Pro Football Reference, which anyone can access, had him, much weaker in coverage last year, like ugly weak in coverage last year. I think a lot of it, Chris, was, the 6th-round pick he was traded for and the contract and the injuries that played into some of the limited role and just the lack of, kind of big moving piece at the trade deadline. So yeah, it's a signing that, to me, it doesn't necessarily lessen the long-term outlook for corner at all, and it shouldn't in the draft. But I think what it takes away is, I think we've seen some mocks that have the Colts taking a corner in the 2nd or 3rd round. There's a possibility that 2nd or 3rd round corner could have been asked to play, 90% of the snaps as a rookie, 80% of the snaps as a rookie. I think this takes that away.
Correct, yeah.
And with him and Rodney McLeod, I mean, that's Super Bowl type resumes on your roster, Super Bowl winners, I should say. So I think that is important as well because you had a lot of youth in the secondary there. So
yeah, and it's nice to have Gus Bradley come over. We're obviously seeing the way he's wanting to hopefully shift the defense to a degree, and as we always talk about, it is a passing league now. So if it's going to be a passing league on offense, and you already feel like your offense is a little bit solidified, which I think we will talk about this with your mock drafts here in a second. Then on the back end of the defense, and then with the Ngakoue, like you said, cannonball versus can opener, you have to do something on the defensive end as well.
Right. And Chris, you could probably do this for any team in the league, but as you said that, just dialed up the schedule for next year, and just off the top of my head, right here, these are some of the wideouts.
Yep, I'm looking at it too.
I mean, Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, Devontae Adams, Devontae Smith, Terry McLaurin, C.D. Lamb, Keenan Allen, Jerry Jeudy, Adam Thielen. I mean, Deontay Johnson. I mean, you can go on and on. And again, you can do that for any team with how the NFL is wired, unless you play the Colts like 16 games out of the year, and then you're probably like, oh, wow, man, can we get them on the schedule more?
And not to mention the way tight ends play now.
Certainly.
And the way we have scat backs. And, I mean, that's why we have Hines. So it's
puts a lot of stress on that position. Again, I still look at it in this defense when you're not going to blitz a ton and you're not going to play a bunch of press, and we'll see. Maybe that'll change. But to me, the rush means more. So I look at Ngakoue as a bigger splash given age, and I get Ngakoue's a free agent, and that's kind of a sneaky position, I think, to watch here in the draft. But kick the tires on former first-round picks. Having said that, I can't sit here and say, like, build number one defense in the NFL right here, right now, just because you got to acknowledge health and age as well. So, Stephon Gilmore, a Colt, I would assume. Maybe we'll get a Twitter question. I assume this kind of limits any sort of notable activity the rest of the offseason. They probably still could do something, 11-ish million, I want to say. But typically, the Colts like to sit on that.
All right, like we mentioned, we are less than a week away from the NFL draft, one of the greatest days in especially our podcast that we like to touch on. Unfortunately, as of right now, and things could change, we do not have a first-round pick, but that does not mean we will not be watching and paying attention. We have a second, a third, a fourth, a 2/5, a sixth, and a seventh, so still 7 picks. Let's go to your positional mock draft that you can find on 1075thefan.com. Let's run through what you're thinking right now. Round 2, you're saying wide receiver.
Yeah, and I guess let's start here, Chris. I'm going to take quarterback off the board for this exercise. I don't think it should be off the board.
Which did shock me.
As I've said, I don't think it should be off the board. But when I'll go positional mock draft here, and this probably appeases, I don't know, I feel like I'm in the minority a little bit in wanting quarterback to still be on the board. But I think this appeases most people in that it's more of a win now focus with this mock draft, which I get. I understand where people are coming from with that thought. Now, before I get into it, it should be noted, Malik Willis, top 30 visit. Sam Howell, top 30 visit. You know, Albert Breer reported late last week a drive down I-74, not to watch the worst baseball team in major leagues, but to watch Desmond Ridder throw the football around. Now, Alec Pierce, I think, is a wideout that would look pretty good as well, but the Colts are doing some very heavy due diligence into this quarterback draft class. I mean, how much smoke can you really create when you're 42 overall? So,
right.
At some point, it's kind of a wasted resource if you aren't doing it to actually potentially do something. So, I do want to note that. We can probably get into it a little bit more maybe next week, but Sam Howell and Matt Corral would probably be quarterbacks that I'm kind of intrigued by a little bit. Ridder, the thing with him is, and I don't want to rip him too much for, but man, when Cincinnati had to step up in competition, I saw a little bit of suspect QB play. Cincinnati won some of those games, but you can make the argument Indiana, they almost won in spite of him at times, and that was one of their bigger games of the year. I can't get out of the miss of Alec Pierce over the middle in the national semifinal game just because I wanted to see an entertaining game more than anything, or at least an entertaining quarter or half, and
right.
not get that. And Ridder also was a 4-year guy. How finished of a product is he? I think that's something you got to acknowledge versus some of the other guys. But anyways, having said all of that, first position I am going with, like you said, wideout. Ideally, you'd find instant impact. You'd find game-breaking speed. To me, that would complement Michael Pittman the best, and I think give Matt Ryan an ability for some yards after catch and just, kind of give you what you were hoping for with Peruse Campbell. So to me, I understand people that would look at draft depth and say, well, tight end, left tackle, there's more of a scarcity in those positions. I get that. I can acknowledge that. But for me, Chris, I'm going to go with wideout here as the top pick. So that would be round 2, 42 overall.
Yeah, and it was good this week also seeing the Colts Twitter account, and obviously they've done such a great job with their social media, kind of giving us a peek behind the curtain, seeing Matt Ryan with Peruse Campbell. So that was nice. I mean, obviously it was just a couple catches that they showed, but nice to see those guys in the lab together, for lack of better words.
Yeah, I saw Strawn, Patman working out. I know people have asked about Michael Pittman a little bit banged up. I know there's some questions like Darius Leonard, Nyheim Hines. I asked Frank today, where are you guys at with 100% attendance? And he's like, yeah, we're not there. I mean, we hope to get there in the next week or so. Again, this is voluntary, so I'm not, overacting any of that. And honestly, it's probably good for those other guys to get a whole lot of reps.
Right. Yeah, and you just mentioned in your breakdown of wide receiver that obviously people will want left tackle and tight end, and those are the two positions that you have coming in round 3 and round 4. First starting with left tackle, and then round 4 with tight end.
And I would push back against people that would look at left tackle and say this is not win now. I did an exercise a few years ago, Chris, where I looked at, it was the year after San Francisco and Kansas City made the Super Bowl. Did that exercise and how many starts came from backup offensive linemen that year. I want to say Kansas City had like 18 starts. San Francisco had, I think it was 16. So basically, you're getting a full season worth of starts out of your backup offensive lineman. Hell, I'd be willing to bet the Colts had that last season. I mean, Colts are one of the more banged up offensive lines, or just a lot of different shuffling, probably is the better way to put it. So you could look at this guy, and if healthy, he might be your 6th offensive lineman, but there's a darn good chance that ain't going to last. So can you find kind of a plug-and-play that, I don't know, maybe you can play a little bit of guard in a pinch? Could help you out at tackle, and you could develop into more of a long-term option out there. So depth is a concern. And again, I know this probably has a little bit more of a long-term view of it, but when you're having more of a statue at quarterback, I think that you definitely need to pay a lot of attention to left tackle and draft and develop at such a key, important position of need.
Absolutely. Round 5, you go to cornerback. We've already talked a little bit about how that depth needs to...
Oh, I go tight end 4, right?
Oh, yeah, sorry, tight end. Sorry, yeah. Tight end 4.
Yeah, tight end 4. Jack Doyle is in retirement, Chris. This is going to be, and I'll give out my mock draft next week, plug players into these. I think can go a couple ways here. I want to side more towards a receiving threat at tight end. I know that Kylan Granson, probably achieves a lot of that, or at least you hope he achieves a lot of that. But, man, Jack Doyle just gave you a reliable consistency, professionalism that it's hard to overlook that. So I'm really interested to see what happens here at tight end. It would be a 4th-round pick for a 2nd straight year at the position. But, again, I think Doyle gave you a whole lot of just reliability that you shouldn't take for granted. I know he wasn't the flashiest guy in the world. There was a ceiling there and all of that. But I'm going to go tight end here in round 4.
Yeah, and Doyle, like you said, he knew his time was coming to an end, and he contemplated coming back. But he was the captain of the offense, in my opinion. I mean, I know Carson Wentz, the quarterback typically is.
Yeah.
But when your tight end is looking at the receivers and he's like, hey, if you don't know where to line up, you look at me, I'll tell you. And also being able to block in the NFL, especially if that offensive line is banged up and you are shuffling, just being that kind of player is so monumental.
Very good points. And I think those are hard things to fully understand. It was almost like, boy, you didn't know how great the person was until their funeral. It was like Jack Doyle leaving. It took that to really – I think we understood it, but then you saw how many people reached out and talked about Zach Pascal's quotes about, just look at me and I'll tell you what to do and all of that. Again, you don't want to take that for granted at all. So wide receiver, left tackle, tight end. It's probably pretty interchangeable. I can hear people out on different orders with that, but that's the order that I'm going with.
A lot of things the Colts have hit on in the last couple of years, fortunately for us, have been later round picks. We have 2 fifths. That's a cornerback and a wide receiver. Never know if those guys later are mainly going to be special teams players, but I want to hear your thoughts on the cornerback and the wide receiver in round 5.
Yeah, and certainly special teams is probably going to be that initial impact at that spot. But, again, I think corner remains a big need. I think it's something that Stephon Gilmore at 32 years old and given the injury history, I mean, you can't even think that, yes, it's a 2-year deal, but you're playing 3 corners a whole lot. And while Isaiah Rodgers is someone you like and Brandon Faison, clearly Gus Bradley has an affinity for, he's never been a full-time starter. So I think you got to go corner. It wouldn't shock me if you went corner a little bit earlier, honestly, than this. But I'll go round 5 here. Probably the longer outside corner is the type that I would look for. Isaiah Rodgers can be a nickel slot if Kenny Moore were to get banged up.
Correct.
And like you said, there's a 2nd, 5th round pick here for the Colts. I'm going to go wide out again. I think it's important to give Reggie Wayne a little bit more clay. Rosie loves her Play-Doh. One thing I've learned about
Does
Play-Doh.
Does she eat it?
Well, we haven't gotten there yet, thankfully. One thing I've learned about Play-Doh, though, man, is get that stuff back in the tube or else it's going to get big time. It's going to look like I just fired my little, is it a kiln? A kin?
Yeah.
Kiln? Yeah, kiln. Kin is your family. Kiln that you fired up back in ceramics class back at, I think I took it at Clay Junior High and Cathedral. But it gets hard real fast, and it isn't very fun to play with. So you need to make sure that you give proper Play-Doh for Reggie Wayne to bring it full circle here. And I think if you can identify a day 3 pass catcher, you look into it and you go there. I know Reese Fountain and Deion Kane, and there's been guys that haven't worked out, and we'll see about Desmond Patman and Mike Strahm, but you keep on trying. If you go heavy speed and a little shorter with that first pick, maybe more of a possession guy with this second wideout if you're kind of looking for different skill sets for Reggie.
Round 6, you're going with a position that I feel like is one of the most athletic positions on the field, and always great to have depth with, especially because some of these guys come up and make very impactful hits, and that's safety.
Yeah, and I'm kind of thinking George Odom 2.0 here.
Right.
Just basically another Odom. Rodney McLeod, again, was a free agent signing that brings over 120 starts to Indy, but he's also going to turn 32 here coming up, and you just don't have a lot of proven depth here, so that's where I look at safety. Special teams you brought up earlier, Chris, heavy there. Julian Blackmon and Kari Willis, to varying degrees, have dealt with injuries. Unfortunately, Blackmon much more serious. Willis, I think, just kind of more nicks and bruises.
Right.
But I think it'd be wise. I know last year you took Sean Davis, a 5th rounder out of Florida. He was a bust. You cut him. He's down in Green Bay. I think it's important to try and tap back into it and just give some depth. And you also lost some special teamers this offseason. Matt Adams, George Odom, Andrew Sendejo, I think, played a little special teams for you as well. So that's where I go safety.
Round 7, and these are always the fun. This is one of my favorite days of the draft, is round 3 or day 3, because you like to see, like you just said, depth is the main word. Round 7, you're going offensive guard. It's never too bad to have as many offensive linemen as you can.
And I'm having a little bit of regret over this, to be honest with you, Chris. I kind of think I should go defensive end. When you look at defensive end and you look at the Colts right now, you've got Kwity Paye and you've got Yannick Ngakoue. Behind them, I'd put Tyquan Lewis and Ben Banigou. Ben Banigou should be lucky to still be on the football team, and Tyquan Lewis, unfortunately, has been incredibly injured in his career. And he's coming off a really serious knee injury. So defensive end is kind of a sneaky position that I'm like, first off, I wouldn't be opposed really if I were a coverer or a fan of any team in the league. You take a defensive end, I'm probably not going to lose too much sleep over it because that position means so much and so difficult to find him. But having said that, if Ngakoue really, continues to bounce around teams and for some reason he just doesn't go well here, and now he's a free agent, he's leaving, Lewis continues to have injuries, Banigou officially looks like a bust, damn. This time next year it's Kwity Paye and who? So I don't know. I put offensive guard on here, but again, I'm starting to think to myself, should I have gone defensive end? I put offensive guard on here. It's because, what's your depth? Will Fry's a 7th-round pick last year. Maybe that is the guy there. But, again, I think when you look at it, boy, defensive end would make a lot of sense here. A couple other positions I thought about. Mm-hmm. I think just kind of a traditional running back, and by traditional I mean early down running back, is probably where I would look. Undrafted free agent makes sense, of course, but that is something that I would look towards. And call me crazy, but I probably wouldn't do it. But if there's a kicker, I would draft a kicker. If you could create a weapon. I know Cincinnati drafted Evan McPherson in the 5th round.
Yes,
that's high. I'm not going there, but name the Colts 7th-round picks in the Chris Ballard era. I mean, sure, Zaire Franklin, but Jackson Barton, Javon Patterson. I'm sure I'm forgetting out. Will Fry's last year. A lot of these are just kind of throwaway picks, anyways. Chris, parity in the NFL. I mean, you're one field goal difference away from winning a game, getting into the playoffs, certainly. I mean, if Cincinnati does have McPherson, they could maybe lose in the 1st round. So that's probably a route that I'd be looking into maybe more than others. But I get it. Some people hate kickers, so they think that's stupid. But
they hate them when they don't make, but when they make them.
Boy, ain't that the truth. Ain't that the truth?
Well, that was Kevin's positional mock draft. Like he said, you can go to 1075thefan.com to look at that. He will have updated coverage as we approach the draft. And do you want to get into this interview that you did with The Athletic? A lot of things that you just mentioned, and I think people will hear this in the interview. That might be why you kind of shift your guard to defensive end because, as Dane will say, as you hear here in a moment, defensive end's a pretty deep class this year. So
yes, and thank you for that. This is Dane Brugler, again, NFL draft analyst from The Athletic. We did this last week. Last Friday, our morning show, Jake Query and myself recorded this. So hope you enjoy Dane Brugler here on Kevin's Corner. Really looking forward to this conversation. For the Colts, the NFL draft, we think as of now, 2 weeks from today, we'll see if they move up 10 spots outside of round one. Right now, one of my favorite reads all year long is The Beast, published by Dane Brugler over on The Athletic. It is a must-read for anybody really that wants to follow anything along the NFL draft. And Dane joins us right now. Dane, if you don't mind, I just kind of want to start on an overview of the 2022 draft class, kind of areas of depth, areas that it's lacking a little bit. When you look at this class as a whole, where do you see the strengths and weaknesses?
Well, starting with the top, this draft's just a little bit different than what we're used to in terms of the talent in the top 10. Aiden Hutchinson, the edge rusher out of Michigan, has a good chance to be the number one overall pick. He probably would not have been a top 10 pick in last year's draft. And that speaks to the quarterbacks that we have this year. That speaks to the lack of high-end talent in the top 10, but I don't want to make it sound like this is a weak draft because it's not. I think the overall depth, especially at certain positions, is very strong throughout the first round into day 2 and then even into day 3. Pass rusher is the strongest position that we have this year. And then that next tier, wide receiver, corner, linebacker, tackle. So, it's in terms of overall depth, there's going to be a lot of future starters that come out of this group. But relatively speaking, not the best year to be picking top 10, especially if you need that quarterback.
Interesting. Okay, so if you are the Colts, Dane, and you're sitting at 42, and let's say you don't move in, you sit right where you are. In terms of their areas of need, and Kevin and I have talked about it, left tackle, receiver, tight end, let's say corner, so those 4. The area that that they need to go ahead and jump on at 42 because the quality then deteriorates at that position moving further back would be which?
Really, you could probably make a case for wide receiver or tackle. I just put together a 7-round mock draft on The Athletic. Went up yesterday, and it's a interesting exercise just to look at to see the runs on positions and what's left and where this team really needs a tackle, but there aren't any left at this point. And so you look at where the Colts are picking, so towards the early part of round 2. And maybe there's a tackle or two that could be there. You're talking about Bernard Raymond from Central Michigan, Tyler Smith, Tulsa. We don't know what grades the Colts have on these players, but those would be realistic options in round 2. If both those guys are off the board, all of a sudden your options, they drop off pretty quickly. Abraham Lucas out of Washington State's a really good player, but he's probably more of a right tackle. I don't know that you're thinking about moving him to the left side. Do you think Darian Kennard can play left tackle out of Kentucky? I don't think so. So I think left tackle definitely would fall into that category. And then wide receiver. We're going to see a lot of wide receivers fly off the board. We could see as many as 5 or 6 go in the first round. We could see as 7 or 8. It's definitely possible as teams look to get younger and cheaper at a position that helps put points on the board. And so we're going to see a lot of receivers fly off the board in the first 32 picks. That'll continue into the early second round. And I actually, in my 7-round mock, I have them going with Sky Moore out of Western Michigan with that first pick with their first pick in the second round. And that's if Sky Moore makes it to them at that point. So wide receiver could be pretty wiped out in a top 40 picks. We'll have to see how it plays out.
He's Dane Brugler. He's with The Athletic, and I do want to get Dane to kind of explain what the Beast is all about here in just a few minutes because, again, I think it's a must-read for anyone wanting to follow along with the NFL draft. But let's stick there with the wideouts. Sky Moore, you mentioned. Maybe not the biggest wideout, but his speed is very impressive. I know you've mentioned kind of he's got strong hands as well. Any other wideouts in that range you think fit kind of the Colts profile? When I think of the Colts and wideouts, I think of very enamored with traits, testing numbers. I think speed to complement Michael Pittman would be the area of focus there. So along with Sky Moore, any other names?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And I think ideally they want size there. But with a guy like Sky Moore, who is just under 5'10", 195, watching him at Western Michigan, a lot of quick game in that offense. And so a lot of slants and his reflexes to make these quick snares of the football, quickly put it away, and then make something happen after the catch. I think he'd just be the perfect complement to Michael Pittman. Whether you play him in the slot, whether you can play outside, I really like that fit. But if they do go with more of a size, speed type of athlete, Christian Watson from North Dakota State obviously is going to be sitting there blinking red lights because 6'4", 210, ran a 4.36 at the combine. His other testing numbers were just off the charts. Now I do think there's a little bit of a buyer beware with Christian Watson. His routes are pretty rough. I mean, they're very raw. His hands are okay, but way too many drops on film. And for a guy that is playing at the FCS level, you just wish you saw him dominate. He's a big receiver that plays small, and that's just not ideal when you're talking about when you're trying to draft traits, but he doesn't always live up to those traits. And so Christian Watson, he could go in the first round because of those traits. But if he does fall to the second round, he could at least be in that conversation. Then throw George Pickens in there as well out of Georgia, 6'3", 195, ran in the 4.4s at the combine. Really like his finishing skills, his ball tracking ability, the competitiveness that he plays with. Not going to give you a ton after the catch. And he's coming off an ACL injury a year ago at this time. So a little bit of a discount sticker on him, but could end up being a steal somewhere in that mid-second round.
Dane Brugler is our guest on the Payless Liquors Hotline. He is with The Athletic talking about the NFL draft. Dane, one guy that a year ago you talked about how, the draft is a fluid thing from one year to the next. Seemingly a guy a year ago who would have had higher stock than he does right now, but I'm curious your assessment of him, is out of Indiana, Ty Freifogel, the wide receiver who kind of fell off a cliff, to be honest with you. What is the assessment of him now that he's gone through, the workouts and those things?
Yeah, and it was unfortunate because he had such a productive year. Only 8 games in 2020. He was an All-American. He was the Big Ten Receiver of the Year. Comes back for that 5th year, that extra year, but because of COVID. And in 12 games, I always look at touchdown to drop ratios for receivers and tight ends. Freifogel in 2020, it was 7-2. Touchdown to drop, pretty good. This past year, 1-8, not what you're looking for. And for a guy that's 6'1", 205, 4.5 speed, so not a blazer. That's not really the strength of his game. He had good jumps when in the vert and the broad jump, but when you put together the lackluster tape as a senior, testing numbers, but nothing that's going to blow you away. He's right there on the cusp of a borderline draft pick. I think you like his routes. You like his ability to always be available with downfield at different levels of the field. But it just everything else screams average. And in the NFL where wide receiver is so competitive with all these athletes, it could end up squeezing him out of the draft.
Dane, while we're on the state school front, again, Dane Brugler from The Athletic is with us. The other 2 names that I'd love to throw at you, David Bell, George Karlaftis. You see Karlaftis going on day 1, and then how much has the testing hurt David Bell's draft stock?
Honestly, and then start with David Bell, I don't think it's hurt him all that much because it was expected. I took a lot of heat from Purdue fans, going back to the summer when I released my, way too early top 50 board. And, I heard from Purdue fans saying, where's David Bell? And honestly, he was never even a consideration for me in that top 50 because, he's a really good receiver, but he's not an explosive guy. And that's something that shows on tape. And it's something that is going to keep him out from being a top 50 player. But, like talking to a scout that was at his pro day, he ran in the 4.7s at his pro day, which is obviously not great. But the scout also said that his positional work, the skill drills, the routes and catching the football, he looked outstanding. And so that's why I still think David Bell is going to be somewhere in that 75 to 100 range, still go on day 2. I still think there's a good chance of that because he knows how to play the position. Not just his routes, but his ability downfield to leverage coverage, to work to space so he can give his quarterback a clean window. He understands certain details of the position that are really going to help him, and he's strong at the catch point. So that's something that I think will really help him throughout this process, and why I don't really think he's going to fall all that much. Karlaftis there's a lot of different opinions on him around the league. I know some general managers believe he's a second-round pick. But I just think when it's all said and done, too many teams need pass rush. There's so much to like about Karlaftis. You wish he was a little bit longer. You wish he had a little more twitch with his movements, but the motor doesn't quit. Very skilled with his hands. And then just his ability to burst out of his stance, pounce and go, even if it's a little bit in a straight line, a little stiff around the edge, he can do that. So, there's a reason Karlaftis opted not to do the 3-cone at the combine or his pro day because we knew it wasn't going to be a good number. Let's not change of direction. It's not really his strength of how he rushes. He's more of a straight line guy, linear athlete. But you can still, win that way as a pass rusher. He can still disrupt the quarterback. So Karlaftis, I think, somewhere in the back half of round 1 is going to be pretty good value for a team looking to upgrade their pass rush.
Dane, if you're drafting, let's say you're drafting 60th, you personally, would you rather have a 6'4" wide receiver that's 205 pounds, runs a 4.4 40, but runs kind of sloppy routes like you were talking about, or you know what I mean, isn't as precise, very raw? Or would you rather have a guy like David Bell whose numbers are not fabulous but runs really precise routes and is crafty?
This is going to sound like a cop-out, but it all depends on what my team looks like. If I'm in a situation where I can afford to wait and develop a guy, where I'm not expecting him to come in and be a starter right away. And, then I would take the guy with the traits. Because that's the NFL teams, they draft traits, not production. And if I'm in a situation where I can do that, I'm always going to lean towards the athletic traits and think, and as long as I think the, issues are fixable and coachable and the player is coachable, I will lean that way. But if I'm in a situation where, I need to win now, I need someone that's able to contribute pretty quickly, then maybe I would skew towards the guy that, has the season routes, who, knows what he's doing, can develop that chemistry very early in his NFL career. So I think it really all depends on the state of your roster, what the trajectory is, all those things factor in.
Dane, I do want to ask about quarterbacks. We've seen Malik Willis, Sam Howell visit the Colts here in top 30 visits. If I'm not mistaken, I think you had Howell mocked them at one point at 42 overall. Let's say they stay in that range. Maybe they trade up a little bit, but for the most part, they keep that early second-round pick. The quarterbacks, Desmond Ridder, Matt Corral, Sam Howell, whoever you want to talk about, around that pick range that you think would make sense to learn under Matt Ryan?
Yeah, and it'll be really interesting to see when that run of quarterbacks starts in the first round. We think these guys are going to go early. They always do. It's just when does that run start? And what's the order of these guys when they come off the board? Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder. I think there's a good chance that we're going to see at least 2 quarterbacks in the top 20. And then possibly even 3. And then which quarterbacks make it to the second round? Matt Corral, does he make it to the second round? Sam Howell, does he make it? I think there's a good chance both do. And if the Colts have a high grade on one of these players and they make it to 42, it'd be hard to pass. And, both these guys, there's things to like. Matt Corral is so quick with everything that he does. His feet, his eyes, his release, it's very, it's a rapid release. Ball is up and gone quickly. And he's got fairly, good accuracy in the intermediate part of the field, deep part of the field. Biggest thing with him is just that post-snap decision-making. Everything was really predetermined in that offense, very defined. And so just making that adjustment to the NFL game, that and then just making sure you're 100% comfortable with the off-field, his decision-making away from the field. That's something that, teams need to be comfortable with. And then with Sam Howell, it's easy to make the Baker Mayfield comparisons because their body types are similar, very compact. He's got a power arm. Sam Howell, stronger than Baker's, the best deep ball thrower in this year's draft. And he's got athleticism. I mean, if you take out the lost yards from sacks last year, he had 7 100-yard rushing games, which is not what you expected, but that's just what the offense asked of him. So Sam Howell has things to work with. I think it's fair to question his ceiling in terms of where he can take you. Can he lead you to the Super Bowl? That's a hard sell to make you believe that, but there's at least talent that would make you consider him in the second round.
Deepest position in the 2022 NFL draft is where?
Edge rusher, no question. I think every point in the draft, first round, second round, third round, there's going to be at least someone that gives you some optimism that he can come in. You add him to your rotation, and he's going to help you make plays. So edge rusher, we're going to see these guys fly off the board in the first round, and it's not going to slow down. Second round, third round, into day 3. A lot of pass rushers are going to be drafted. I think I had 18 or 19 in my top 100, by far the most represented position in my top 100 this year.
Man, and talk about a coveted position in today's NFL,
yeah,
certainly
real.
As well. Dane, outstanding. For those that don't know, give us a little glimpse into what goes into the beast and what is the beast.
It's in my opinion, the most comprehensive NFL draft guide out there. It's a year in the making. I work all year round on it. And there's testing data for 1,700 players in there. And I don't think there's any other guy that has anything close to that. 400 scouting reports, a lot of extensive background information. So if you're interested in the NFL draft at all, 0% chance that you would be disappointed by what you find in this thing. And all you need is an Athletic subscription, and it's included. So even if you want the Athletic you want to try it for a month, you're going to get the guide. You can download it, right to your computer, your tablet, straight from there. So hopefully people go check it out.
288 pages. Jake, how long did you say your paper was yesterday?
7 pages, buddy.
7 pages.
Yep.
You want to test Dane there? 288.
Well, I don't see him writing about The Shining and The Omen.
Instead of British horror films, Dane, I think, is doing what he loves. Dane, I know it's a crazy time for you, and it's probably a tad bit relaxing, maybe the closer you get to the draft, but not too much with, kind of some late rumors floating in. So thank you for making time for us on this Friday morning.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks, gentlemen.
And that was Dane Brugler right there from The Athletic. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I just think he brings a great temperament, Chris. I really enjoy that. I've read his Beast several times. It's a terrific read. Comes in handy. Honestly, if you love the NFL draft, just subscribe to The Athletic just for that, frankly. So I appreciate Dane's time.
Yeah, how about those number of pages?
Oh, my gosh, man. Yeah. Can you imagine? Think about the papers that you wrote in college, and then
holy
granted,
cow,
I would say the topic material is a little bit different. So yeah, that was Dane Brugler, and let's get into Twitter questions.
All right, first one's going to come from Johnny, as we mentioned at the top of the podcast, and is going around Twitter right now. The big news in the NFL is Deebo Samuels. Johnny wants to know, if you're the Colts, do you go after Deebo? Is it for real? That's his question. Is it just for the money? Or is he really done with San Francisco? Red flag for Chris Ballard at all? And what package would you say he's worth?
Boy, let me start here. I love Deebo Samuel. Love him. I think he's one of the most unique players I've seen in the NFL in quite some time. Pretty sure he has led the league in yards after catch, or I don't know, yards after contact. Certainly, you could probably point that as well, but probably yards after catch in recent years. But yeah, he does it without being this 4.32 40-yard dash guy like a Tyreek Hill or something like that. His ability to just kind of make people miss, not go down on first contact, it's so rare. So I love Deebo Samuel, love watching him play. I'm thinking, if I'm turning the keys over to Trey Lance, I'd like to give Trey Lance, Deebo Samuel, and George Kittle. So
right,
if I'm San Francisco, I don't know how much I'm listening to this, and we'll see how all of that plays out. I just got an email about the odds for Deebo Samuel. You brought this up earlier. Colts plus 450,
wow,
favorite
So we moved up. Okay.
Chiefs, Jets, and Saints all plus 500. Packers at plus 600. And the Eagles at plus 800. Obviously, the Colts a slight favorite because those odds are, pretty much the same as Indianapolis, at least Chiefs, Jets, and Saints. The whole, usage, does he not like being as much of a running back, all that. First off, I would love how Kyle Shanahan is utilizing me. Now, I get it. There's some wear and tear on his body he probably doesn't love. But if he wants 20-some million.
Right.
Deebo, I'm using you a whole lot, man. So there's got to be a little bit of give and take there. Now, obviously, what would it take to get him? I would assume something similar to what we saw with Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams. That means a first-round pick. Is San Francisco content with not getting a first-round pick this year? San Francisco, I don't believe, picks until late second this year because they gave up their first for Trey Lance in trading up to get him third overall last year. So this comes back to kind of the age-old question we've had with the Colts and whether it was Devontae Adams or Russell Wilson or potentially Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, whatever. The Carson Wentz trade of him was such a massive failure in that you sit here and these types of entertaining moves to some teams are just non-starters because you don't have that first-round pick you can offer. Right now, the Colts could have 3 picks in the first 2 rounds next year if Wentz, meets the parameters in Washington. Are you willing to give up 2 of those for Deebo?
That's going to be the.
That's the internal debate, Chris.
Exactly. And also, like you said earlier, just because you request a trade doesn't mean you're being traded. You can request whatever you want.
Yeah, San Francisco is going to want a king's ransom,
right?
If they are going to do that. Part of me thinks again, I would love Deebo Samuel on this football team, and giving up two of those 3 picks, you would still have something, in the first 60 selections next year. But man, 2 things pop into my head. What about quarterback? We continue to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, is Deebo Samuel made of steel? How long can he keep this up? Because he does get a whole lot of touches, and he does play a very physical brand of football. That would worry me. So I tend to think that this would not happen, given those things. Chris Ballard and paying that much money for kind of wide receiver running back, I would say no. You would think the Jets, right?
I would think so. I mean,
I don't know, maybe they really wanted. I mean, Tyreek Hill and Deebo Samuel, to be fair, are very different players. So maybe they thought Tyreek Hill really fit Zach Wilson and his arm and all of that. And again, how much smoke is this? To your earlier point of is this really going to happen?
And I don't know how much. Say you're an Aaron Rodgers. Say it comes down to a quarterback. When someone says they want to request a trade, like I said, you can request whatever you want. How many guys are hitting up their GM this morning saying, "Are we kicking the tires on this?
Yeah.
Are you looking into this?" I mean, if you're Aaron Rodgers and you just lost Devontae Adams, and it's like, you guys never draft me a first-round wide receiver anyway, you guys better be looking into this.
Now, of course, does San Francisco want to move him within the NFC? And those things. There's no trade clause with Deebo, so that's another thing that you have to look for as well. So yeah, we'll see how everything plays out. Again, an unbelievable talent. I just don't see it unfolding.
Kevin, this next question, as we sit here in Indianapolis at 3:44, and it's probably about 60 degrees outside, if that. This one's coming from one of the places that you would probably love to play golf. I don't know if you ever have or not. From Hawaii.
My wife and I, we did 9 holes on our honeymoon there.
Very nice.
Yeah, great time out there. Hawaii, I love it.
Yeah, so this one comes from Mario. The Colts' top 2 wide receivers that are on the roster currently have 146 career catches. That's the least amount of any NFL starting duo, and Cooper Kupp alone had 145, which, I mean, he's just a stud. The steep class of wide receivers and trading next year's first and second for Deebo Samuel or DK Metcalf to Mario seems appealing. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think this is a Dan Orlovsky worded tweet almost. I saw Orlovsky last night had something very similar to this, and it's kind of how the national media typically operates. Something locally we've been kind of banging home for about a month or two, especially when you're the Colts. Eventually it gets to Bristol, and it has gotten to Dan Orlovsky, and he fired this off last night. I legitimately think the Colts have belief in the names that we mentioned a couple podcasts ago. And I don't know if it's all these names, but Kiki Kuti and DeMichael Harris and Desmond Patman and Mike Strawn and I guess Paris Campbell staying healthier. I really think there is a belief that one of these guys will emerge. Because, again, they've been saying this since the Combine. It's not like they were like, hey, let's see what happens in free agency. Let's pursue some guys. But if we don't, get anything, then we'll, kind of sit on it and wait till the draft. Well before free agency, they were adamant that they thought one of these guys would emerge. Yeah, we'll have to see how things play out in the draft. But, Chris, I also feel like, so many people are just like, oh, well, the Colts are just going to draft one and everything's going to be fine. And again, my issue, and I got into this with JMV, our afternoon host last week, I have quarterback still on the board, and he goes, no, you can't do that. You have to go win now. You have to support Matt Ryan. I go, your opportunity to get proven players who therefore are able to help you more quickly than drafted players is in free agency or in prior drafts where, you are building to this and you hit on those picks. You can't assume that pick 42 and 73 are going to all of a sudden come in here and be like, ta-da, boom.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, yeah.
I looked at it the other day, Chris. I want to say there's basically, if you look at the last couple drafts and the rookie impact of wideouts, basically the average rookie wideout drafted early, like where the Colts are drafting, gets you what Zach Pascal produced for you last year. And I think a lot of people were very disappointed with the season Zach Pascal had. Was that all Carson Wentz driven? Did you catch that Zach Pascal Carson Wentz clip, by the way, from a few days ago?
I did not know. What?
Pascal was asked, he was at Old Dominion spring game about, nothing like the TV reporter starting off with, you and Carson had really good rapport last year. I'm like, what games were you watching?
Game 1 and 2, that's about it.
I was like, shit, man, you must have got a different feed of Colts games than I was getting. To preface it with that, and then basically asked Pascal, did you think about teaming up with Carson in Washington? Nah, absolutely not. I'm like, whoa, okay, boy. That Philly-Washington rivalry.
Yeah, no, I'll play against him twice a year. We're good.
Alive and well there. So thank you, Mario, and greetings. Aloha.
Beautiful.
To you.
Kevin, this one's from Jason. What Colts free agents do you see most likely to return, and extra points for chaos if you choose Badgley? Badgley. I always say, I don't know why I always mispronounce his name, and I apologize.
So who's still left? You got Hilton, Badgley, like you said, Eric Fisher, a couple older corners, Xavier Rhodes, TJ Carey. I think, again, you kind of see what happens in the draft at kicker. And I don't know, maybe the Colts looked at this and then they're like, all right, we know Michael Badgley's not going to have a big market in free agency. Let's see how the draft plays out. Let's see how the undrafted kicker market plays out. And if we don't find anybody that we really like, we'll bring Badgley back. But if not, I just can't. To me, Hot Rod has not earned the right to not have any competition. I know there's another kicker on the roster, but I don't think he's ever kicked in the NFL before. So I would say Hilton is the most likely to return, and then Badgley would be a close second.
And do you think we're done in free agency? Kodak wants to know, because he's been hearing some smoke about Dwayne Brown, who is the left tackle in Seattle. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, I've not heard that, Kodak. And again, kind of going back to the Gilmore thing, I would probably have rather have seen that money utilized at like wideout or tight end. Or a combination of both, I guess. You could probably use a little bit of both there. As far as, again, you could probably make one more move, but I think they are done substantially. I don't see Jarvis Landry, Dwayne Brown, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So, yeah.
This one's from Low End Theorist. Kevin, first off, hope you and your family had a great Easter weekend.
Appreciate it. Same to you. Same to all of our listeners.
While he believes Carson Wentz had to go, he also feels the narrative of his failures and stretch run were a little overblown and thinks Chris Ballard realized that the defense needed work, and he feels he's made significant moves this offseason to address them, as we've talked about earlier. He watched the Raiders and Jags go up and down the field on this defense with relative ease. Do you believe this defense on paper is better than it has been in years?
Well, I think on paper it checks a lot of boxes. I guess to your earlier point, though, I agree. I think the Wentz thing got overblown. The defense did not take the step necessary. So I love kind of the critical eye, and I don't know, maybe it took Gus Bradley. I've mentioned this before. I think if Eberflus was here, I don't know if Yannick Ngakoue's here. Ngakoue's a free agent a couple off seasons ago.
Mm-hmm.
Eberflus, we need defensive ends to, be able to stop the run, early downs, I think you can find some pretty situational rushers and use them very effectively. So I'm glad that they've taken a critical look, realizing that Darius Leonard is a great gift and a great talent, but don't let that mask other warts defensively. So on paper, this is, I think, a pretty good defense. I don't love the depth, but that at times can be a little bit too much. We'll see how things play out. Now, Julian Blackmon's coming off a torn Achilles. Gilmore's dealing with, a couple lower body stuff or has dealt with some stuff, and does that become a little bit more nagging? But still, I think there's a lot to like about it.
This next one comes from a longtime listener and often Twitter question asker, Gary. First off, very humbled. He says that this is the best Colts podcast. Everything's a distant second, which
appreciate that, Gary.
Very nice of you to say.
Thank you.
We like all the Colts reporters out there.
Don't go nice. We hate them all. We're all, screw them. Don't listen to their podcast.
Look at our ratings. We'll tweet them out. He says, okay, I feel like the running back depth still needs to be addressed. What do you think about that?
Chris, it's one of those things, like if Jonathan Taylor went down, which he never has in his college or his football career, really, then all of a sudden this would be very pressing. But you look at the running backs right now on the roster, I think it's just three: Taylor, Hines, and Deion Jackson. I know they're high on Deion Jackson, undrafted kid last year, saw a little bit of mop-up time in that game down in Houston, but it's kind of what I mentioned a little bit earlier. I think finding an undrafted runner, finding a runner, even in the 7th round, I don't think it's the craziest idea in the world, just as insurance policy. You saw Tennessee, they got into it last year where they're kind of in scramble mode, and Adrian Peterson, here you go.
Yeah, you've always been a proponent of that.
Yeah, I'm all for day 3 running backs, undrafted running backs. Keep the stable. I thought Jordan Wilkins was such a great insurance policy, so no longer here. So make another move.
Kevin, this one comes from Brian. He says, if Gus Bradley's name helps get free agent signing, what does that say about Frank Reich? No offensive free agents to speak of. No offensive free agents to speak of that are of any note?
Yeah, I don't get it. I don't know how much it says about how people view Reich around the league versus how people view Gus Bradley. I think Chris Ballard realized, all right, we have a new defensive coordinator. He wants to do things differently. We need to make sure that, we've got some personnel in here that can fit his system. Go back to the Ngakoue thing, Brandon Faison. Clearly, you're getting guys that have past history with him. To some degree, Reich and Ballard have believed on, I think there's a pretty collaborative effort in the building of the offensive side of the ball between those two. So I think that has just kind of played into them believing in it and them sticking with it. Again, I don't agree with it. I think you need to support Matt Ryan a little bit more, but this is where we're at.
Earlier in your mock, you did mention of the 7 picks, 5 of them are going to be offensive. So I think that kind of answers Colton's question, but I'll let you speak on it a little bit more. He wants to know, with the Stephon Gilmore addition and some of the other things on defense, is it safe to say that we are going to go draft heavy offensively?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of belief and reasons for that. Again, I've pointed out a couple positions, corner, defensive end, that I still think should be of note in this draft. But having said that, you go back to the Rock Ya-Sin draft, Chris, of Rock and Kari Willis and Bobby Okereke and EJ Speed and I know I'm forgetting somebody. It was Banagoo in that draft. For some reason, he's ringing a bell. That was a heavy defensive draft. So is that a path that you take just on the reverse? Certainly, it would make a lot of sense there.
Kevin, good day from Australia.
Whoa! Chris Presley from Melbourne.
We got Jay Sacco with a question.
I thought you were going to keep that going for the whole question.
Do you want me to do it? I can. I don't want to be offensive to.
No, not at all. I think, can America have a worse reputation? Let's be honest here. Continue it. From down under right there.
From down under. Looking forward to the big 2022 season for the Colts, and hopefully wishing your Irish and Marcus Freeman a good luck.
I'm clapping the Irish before I'm clapping your accent. You sound like Cameron Smith, the golfer.
Question 1. Have there been an update on talks with T.Y. Hilton to potentially resign?
Well, Jay Sacco. Well, you said Jay Sacco?
Yeah.
Okay. We've talked a little bit about Hilton. I want to get to question 2 because I want to hear more of the accent.
Would you rather scenario A, the Colts trade up to the end of the first round to get Matt Corral or Desmond Ridder? Scenario B, given now that we're signed Gilmore and the other offseason moves in Gakwe, Matt Ryan, Rodney McLeod, would we rather instead use both of our second and third round picks for a wide receiver to help support Matt Ryan?
Look at that. Chris Presley right there. Gosh, we are a global podcast. That's beautiful. You said Sydney, Australia?
Yes.
For Jay Sacco?
Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that.
And he also wanted to wish you a happy Easter as well.
Well, happy Easter to all of our listeners and for those celebrating other things this past weekend as well. Thank you very much for listening to the podcast. Hope you enjoyed the family time. Okay, scenario would be the Colts trade up into the first and get Corral or Ridder.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one is you'd go wide out. The first 2?
Correct.
Man, that's a good one. Like, God, so much of it is like, what do you want on the plate? What do you want? Can you promise me Matt Ryan for 2 to 3 years? Can you promise me no drop-off? That's probably the other thing we need to start, acknowledging. It's less about, does Matt Ryan want to play 2 or 3 years? Can his body hold up for 2 or 3 years? Does he play at a level that's necessary for 2 to 3 more years? I probably side with a little bit of A, but, man, scenario 2 is juicy.
Yeah.
It's juicy. And I know a lot of people sit here and say, hey, you worry about quarterback next year. And I get it. I understand. Deeper class. You've got more draft capital, all those things. Of course, you didn't cover your ass with Costanzo. Look where you're at right now. You didn't cover your ass with Rivers. Look where you're at right now. Do you want to make the mistake for a third time? That's my worry. But, boy, Jay Sacco, that's terrific. Yeah, wide out.
Okay.
Sky Moore, David Bell.
Love it.
Alec Pierce and that'd be interesting.
All right, 4 more. This one is based off the needs for Ballard from a question from Patrick. Sense of the roster, and I don't know necessarily where he got these odds from, if he's making them up. I'm sure he found them off of some site. Offensive line plus 200.
Oh, wait. Stop. So this is draft, like what the Colts will do with their first pick.
Best bet for the Colts draft. So he's giving you odds on who you think the first pick is going to be for the Colts draft.
Got it. And these are positional odds.
Yes.
Okay.
Offensive line plus 200, wide receiver plus 300, defensive line plus 350, defensive back plus 400, quarterback plus 700, linebacker plus 1,000, and tight end plus 1,500.
Boy, I like these.
These are fun.
Yeah. These get me excited.
Yeah.
These get me excited. I'm like Rosie. Peppa Pig just came on the TV. I'm excited. Okay. Well, we know Ballard always likes the trenches. We know that. So you got to keep an eye there. Wide receiver at plus 300 seems like some good value to sprinkle. You say quarterback plus 700?
Yes.
I mean, shit, how do you not throw a little bit there? What was tight end?
Tight end plus 1,500.
I mean.
You got to throw at least
got
like
to.
$5 on it, right?
I mean, you probably get the best tight end in the draft, right? 42 overall.
Yep.
And that's the thing about tight end is, as much as you can say dime a dozen, man, if you got a Waller, you got a Kittle, you got a Kelsey.
Yeah.
You brought it up earlier, man. Okay, I'd probably go wide out. I'd sprinkle tight end. I'd sprinkle quarterback, and just pray that Ballard doesn't go with his trenches.
There you go.
I know it's risky, but yeah.
Kevin, Joe feels like the Colts should open the checkbook the same way that the Rams did, and he doesn't even understand if the salary cap is even real the way that they spend some money. How does the salary cap work?
Boy, we would need about 10 hours of this. Did you see the Colts got into this a little bit with the Next Pick series?
Yes.
Last week, they had Mike Bloom, their capologist. Good dude.
Such a great episode. I love seeing that dynamic.
And, Bloom's a Grigson guy.
Okay.
Held over from the Ballard or with the regime change there. You can manipulate the cap. You can continue to put money off into the future.
Mm-hmm.
Some teams want to carry over that money. Some teams want to be flexible. And flexibility can work. The Colts have been in situations where they've had flexibility that's allowed them to make some other moves. My thing is this, and this is what I kind of like. And I'll be honest, there are parts of the cap, and thankfully I don't cover the NBA as deep and focused as I do the NFL. The NBA cap will stress you the hell out. NFL cap already causes a few more gray hairs than I'd like. Where I've disagreed with the Colts in years past is the Colts have been very big on one-year deals. Very big on that. That allows you an opportunity, Chris, to sign players, and then, boom, that money's off your cap. Or sign a guy to a 2-year deal, super front-load it, and then kind of wash your hands of it, which is the motion that you were just making. I mean, those are kind of some moves that I'm like, man, this can help out I get you want a core, and you want a continuity, and you want a group that you can put on the side of Lucas Oil Stadium. I get all that. But supplementing that roster, I feel like there hasn't been as much of a use there that there has been by some other teams around the league that have benefited from that. So, yeah, Joe, cash versus cap, they got into that a lot. The accounting of it all. I think how teams manipulate it is they continue to put off money and absorb a whole lot of dead money, and that's how they operate with it.
And to be honest, I think it makes sense to keep someone like that over from another regime because could you imagine walking in? Your first day at a new job is already difficult as it is.
They know the books.
To come in looking at the books, they're talking about the Washington Nationals, just to jump to baseball real quick. Juan Soto, who's one of the best players, probably top 5 in baseball, doesn't want to sign there because they want to pay him $350, which is great, but they want to back pay him. They're still paying Max Scherzer $17 million a year for the next 6 years. It's just
and
crazy.
Baseball's cap and how owners spend.
It is
a whole different animal.
It is just ridiculous. So didn't mean to muddy the waters there, but
no. And again, explaining this stuff, we had Joel Erickson, who I think does an outstanding job for the Indy Star. We had him on our show. He comes from the New Orleans beat, and they are the biggest manipulators of the cap. And I was like, Joel, can you please explain it to us, how it happens? And it was difficult for Joel. And Joel's a smart dude. And I think Joel does a good job of, which is so much of our job of yes, the 99.9 percentile of it all, but you got to dumb it down a little bit because you do have, especially on our morning radio show, we don't have the diehards like we do necessarily on this podcast.
Correct.
Hopefully we have some people that listen to both, but it's a little bit more of the common casual fan. Man, it's tough. Joel got down with his answer. I'm like, dude, I'm sorry, Joel. I'm more confused. And we had kind of a one-on-one with Bloom last year, and some bonuses you can kind of play around with, signing bonuses, move them out to certain years versus roster bonuses and all of that. So I probably haven't answered the question at all, but if I ever find a way to be more basic about it, I'll be sure to bring it to the pod, Joe.
2 more. This one's from Jason. Colts were ranked very low on the snaps played by rookies last year, and they only were missing a 3rd-round pick. What does this say to you?
I don't think it says too much. If I'm not mistaken, Chris, and we'll do this here in a few weeks, we'll do a podcast right after the draft of projecting rookie playing time. Last year, there's no way we projected a lot of rookie playing time. Obviously, Kwity Paye, certainly.
Yes.
But Daya was coming off the torn Achilles. Sam Ellinger plays quarterback. and Kylan Granson was your third tight end. I mean, sure, you cut Sean Davis, and I don't think it says too much to me.
All right, we're going to stick there with the last question from the podcast with Alec grading the 2021 draft picks who played last season. He will let you determine how many draft snaps were enough to give a grade on a guy that played sparingly, like Mike Strawn and Will Fries. Who did you grade best out of the draft picks from last year?
Again, I got just a lot of incompletes. A Dangbo, how can you grade him? Tony Keeley's in eight games. Like, it'd be unfair to give anything. Sean Davis, he's a butt. He's gone. He's not here, so that's an F. I guess that's an obvious grade. Quiddy, I'd probably give a, he's probably like me in a lot of those Kelly school classes I took in college, just straddling the C+, B-. Let's just, I'm taking a sport comm major. I need something of Kelly school on my resume before I leave here. So let's get a marketing minor. I'll go there, kind of hovering right around a B. Granson, probably a little lower. Not all his fault, but just impact. What do you have, 11 catches? I'd go low C there. Ellinger, again, impossible to grade. Mike Strawn, I feel like we could pull the audio back from camp. Guys, Mike Strawn had another big day, but again, my expectations are maybe a red zone role. You don't want to get too far ahead of yourself with some of that. So Strawn, just based off where he was drafted, I would have said the expectations were exactly what happened. I thought it was a redshirt year. In training camp, I thought there might be a little bit of an uptick, red zone, and that didn't play out. And again, that's the other thing I keep on getting back to with wideout, Chris, is your group underperformed last year at wideout, and yet those guys couldn't get on the field. Patman, Strawn, healthy guys. Kiki Kuti, he was healthy on your practice squad. He couldn't play either. So, I guess one last note on Deebo, too, that kind of popped into my head is just, are you willing to give up the capital and give the extension? That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Are you willing to do both? Colts MO at that position has typically not been to do one, let alone either, or let alone both, I should say. Granted, he's a pretty unique player, so it'll be fascinating to see 49ers calls bluff or how that all plays out.
Right. All right, well, that wraps up Twitter questions. Obviously, we'll be back next week as we look forward to the draft. Anything you want to add to note or anything on the docket that people should be looking for on the website coming up?
We got a lot of draft coverage that is either up on the site or will be up on the site, and also just some spring roster stuff. I always like to take a position-by-position breakdown of the roster this time of year. I posted a depth chart. Right now, again, it's a rough sketch, but I think it's good to just have eyes on that going in the draft of like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that, that thin there, or, oh, wow, that's a little deeper there than I originally thought. So that's up on the website now. Again, Colts coverage, you can find that. Scroll through my Twitter feed. There's some article links as well. Chris Presley, thank you. Your Australian accent was brilliant. Good day, mates. Had to go get a bloomin' onion for dinner to round things out there.
And a Foster's.
Oh, look at that. Look at that. I had a Foster's on my birthday one year because myself and Jack Dillon and Alex Miller had a Foster's. This thing was horrible. No offense, Jay Stacco from Sydney. I appreciate your listening. I downed it, but it wasn't necessarily by choice. Again, Chris Presley, Kevin Bowen. I've got a bachelor party this weekend. Prayers accepted. We'll talk to you next week. Draft next week. Enjoy. Later.
This has been Kevin Bowen. Thank you for listening to another edition of Kevin's Corner. If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher for the best Colts and Pacers coverage.